Hello and welcome to At the Table. I am Audrey Galex. Thank you so much for being with us. As we know all too well, we live in a world that is polarized politically, socially, oftentimes economically, when there's so much conflict, and so often we perhaps feel helpless to address any of that. Well, one way to do so is to begin to display or show compassion toward oneself and towards others, and with us to speak about the issue of compassion, what that means, and initiatives to spread compassion globally in one's community are the co-directors of Compassionate Atlanta. We have with us today Leanne Rubenstein and Iyabo Onipede, the co-directors of Compassionate Atlanta. Thanks so much for being with us at the table.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
So as I said, live in this troubled world, and I'm kind of curious, but maybe people in our audience are thinking, what does compassion have to do with addressing this? Leanne, if you'd start us off, what is compassion?
So compassion is really defined as alleviating the suffering of another. And suffering doesn't have to be the worst possible thing. It can just your neighbor who's feeling lonely, a kid on the playground who doesn't have friends to play with. There are lots of two people that are in disagreement. That's okay, but compassion is taking the action to make that a better situation, to make it better for that person. So we all have it in us to help one another. And compassion just asks us to see the world in the way that we all have an opportunity to make a difference in a good way.
And we know that conflict is part of the human condition. I mean, no two people can live together. You think of siblings, sometimes they want to, scratch each other's eyeballs out. And yet, how do we use compassion to navigate those kinds of situations? Yeah,
well, conflict comes out of difference. And yet, every single human being has a very unique imprint, a very unique DNA. So we're required to be different. It is human nature to be different. But when we turn that difference into conflict because you're not like me, you're forgetting something really, really basic. So let's think of moms. A woman has a baby, or a person has a baby. That mothering, nurturing aspect sacrifices for that baby. A baby cannot come out and start walking. A baby relies on the compassion of the mother. There is a science to compassion. It is not just religious and emotional. It is more of an ethic and a cultural way of being than it is an emotion. Right?
But unpack that. Mm-hmm. You said something about, I've never really been familiar with that expression, the science of compassion.
Compassion is scientific, and there's a lot of work to do to measure it. Emory University works with their doctors to train them in compassion. We know a doctor's bedside manner is very important, right? Same thing with talking about the science of compassion. They've done experiments with monkeys where they give one monkey 3 bananas and the other one they don't give any to, and the monkey shares, right? Like, this is not fair. They've done a lot of experiments on this. So our innate default nature is to be compassionate. If we do not have each other, we cannot survive. That's why compassion is important. Think of being out in the wilderness, right? Humanity was never designed to be solitary. We are group people. We move in packs to protect ourselves. That's why when our babies are born, they have to grow into adulthood. Horses, for instance, the babies come out, they start walking. They don't require the mothering compassion to grow into adulthood. So our default nature is to provide and care for each other.
So part of that is self-preservation,
yes.
Preservation of the species.
We
need to learn to be compassionate, and yet, you think, I'm thinking about those monkeys that you referred to. You think, there would be that scarcity abundance model, like I have and I have to protect, and if I give it to you, then I'll have less.
Yes.
Can I add some? Oh, sorry.
Mm-hmm. And isn't that what a lot of our polarizations and conflicts are about? I got to keep how it was, scarcity, and scarcity is a myth. It is a myth. We cannot breathe all the oxygen there is in this room. We can't. That's a myth, that scarcity we have to preserve.
Leanne.
So what I wanted to add about the science of compassion is that Iyabo and I went to a conference right before COVID, and it was at the Task Force for Global Health. And it was on the science of epidemiology of love and compassion. And we sat in a room, here we are, a grassroots organization thinking we're doing our little thing, with people from Harvard and Emory and the World Health Organization and all these big names, and they're studying compassion and love. And they have science behind what they are studying. So it's about the brain, and a lot of it is about part of what Iyabo talked about. We cannot live as single beings in the world.
That
right?
No man is an island.
Well, loneliness is an epidemic, right? It's a health problem in our country is loneliness, right? People actually die because of maybe not technically the loneliness, but it adds to that,
A
right?
sense of isolation.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so,
lack of purpose, etc.
So that's part of it. And the other part is our brain. And how does our brain work? And what do we say to ourselves? And how do we see others? And you can change that in your brain. We all have an inner critic, right? And sometimes that inner critic gets loud. But we can also shift the way we're thinking. We can tell ourselves all these negative thoughts. So I talk to Rollins School of Public Health once a year. And when I talk to those students, I say, okay, let's take a scenario. You get a bad grade on a test. So what happens in your head? You say, oh, I can't believe it. I'm so bad. I'm probably going to fail this class. Maybe I shouldn't even be in school. I should just forget it. I have another test, but I'm not going to work. And you go down that rabbit hole, okay? Well, what if you got a bad test in class, a bad grade, and you said, oh, I'm so mad at myself. And then you said, okay, I'm going to just take a breather. Now, what can I do? Maybe I can write to the professor. Maybe I can study better for the next test. Maybe I can ask if there's extra credit to make up. And then all of a sudden, you're not feeling that way anymore, and you've got a different trajectory. Well, we can do that all over our life in all different ways, whether it's sitting in traffic or talking to our sibling that we may or may not be getting along with, whatever
and I think
that is.
eventually you will be getting along. It's just
Yes.
when you're kids, you will protect them.
Sometimes.
Sometimes.
But we are all different, right? And so that science is training your brain. It's like exercising a muscle. And then you do it for yourself, and then you start doing it for others. And you see the common humanity rather than the difference.
So what is this whole, we have to have an organization around compassion? It sounds like this should be something that's just taught in schools and your family, et cetera. How did this initiative start to have a compassionate Atlanta, a compassionate whatever the city's name is, et cetera?
Well, it actually started in 2008. Karen Armstrong did a TED Talk on compassion. She's a religion scholar. And what she said is religion should do no harm, that we should teach our children about other traditions, religions, and cultures. And in her words, we should dethrone ourselves and put another there. Dethrone ourselves from the center of the universe and put another there. Now, when she got the TED wish, and her wish was to create a simple document that could be adopted around the world. And since then, it has been adopted around the world. So we are not a faith-based organization. We are connected to the interfaith world, but we're with everybody. The secular world, if your higher power is going out in nature, it's not about religion, but it is about some tenets that at the core are about treating others the way they wish to be treated. And so it started with Karen Armstrong. Our founder, Bob Thompson, was asked to do an event here and did a Compassionate Atlanta kickoff. And for the first year, it was run by volunteers. And they said, you know what, I think we need to get stronger as an organization. And they looked around, is anybody else doing this? And sometimes we talk about ourselves as, everybody has a PR department, right? So from government offices have PR departments, and certainly big corporations have PR departments, but there's no PR department for humanity, right? So in some ways, that's who we are. You can look at the news and you can see, it's heartbreaking. And you can look at really good things happening. Mr. Rogers, when he was talking to kids about tragedies, he used to say, look for the responders. And when you look at the responders, you get a different feeling of that situation. Not to say that you shouldn't have pain for what's happening, but you also have the sense of hope of what's to come.
And so how does this Compassionate Atlanta initiative, where do we see it in Atlanta? What kinds of things are you doing?
Gosh, what aren't we doing, right? So we have, at Compassionate Atlanta, we have 3 pillars. Everything we do is based on education, collaboration. We have over 170 local partners, and promoting civic engagement, because compassion covers all those things. You go from self-compassion, which I want us to talk about, compassion with and for others, because that's how you strengthen it, that's how it grows, and then compassion in systems. So when it comes to governance and promoting civic engagement, DeKalb County, we're so proud of our county. They just agreed to sign the Global Charter for Compassion and be part of what we're doing. And for instance, Commissioner Michelle Spears-Long is doing a State of the Animals address for DeKalb County in April, because animals are part of this compassion language where they're our neighbors, they're part of our families, and animals are part of the family, the pet. So each of these things, they tie into each other and they flow into each other. So these pillars, we have these pillars, and we have 5 great initiatives. Everything we do, all our programming falls under one of these initiatives. The first is our glorious, glorious annual festival called Compassion Con, like Comic-Con, Compassion Con, where we just go celebrate compassion. We have it at Legacy Park, where our offices are, in the fall. And we bring together businesses, governments, organizations, individuals, food vendors that center compassion and inclusion in their work. The other initiative we have is called Restoring Dignity. And this is where, think about that word dignity. For compassion, the result of compassion is dignity. And a lot of times we have these individual stories, like a refugee coming from the Congo and has been living in a refugee camp for 20 plus years and finally gets a entry into America and is able to build a life. That's dignity. We work with a grant we got about how Black heterosexual women in the South are the fastest growing new demographic of HIV cases, right? That's a story about dignity. There's so much stigma about it that our work is to help counter stigma with compassion, and the result is dignity, right? So, and under that we have Pride in Mother Tongue for immigrant and refugee LGBTQIA community, plus community, and they get to be among themselves and be with each other and be free, because a lot of times in more conservative immigrant communities, people can't really be out or feel a sense of cultural belonging and their sexual identity and sexuality belonging. So we create that space for them to be included in our community. We also have the remembrance projects out of the Equal Justice Initiative, where we're putting plaques all over the place around people who were lynched during Reconstruction. That's about reclaiming a story of dignity in the Black community. We have a play. We put together a play that is now a film that will be launched later this year, that was written by Cassandra Henderson, about restoring dignity from stigma to compassion. And it's the stories of women who face stigma in their faith spaces. Our compassion in community is where we do a lot of self-compassion work. We offer yoga classes at Legacy Park, where our offices are for our community and the local community, yoga nidra classes once a month to support one of the nonprofits in Legacy Park. And also we have grief work that happens every month for grief healing circles, because those are the things that hold us back from being compassionate to ourselves. Then we can't be as fully compassionate to others. We also have compassionate cities of Georgia and throughout the state. So we're compassionate Atlanta, but what can you do? You got to go throughout the whole state, right? That's compassion. Throughout Georgia, whether it's working with DeKalb County, Augusta, a nonprofit in Augusta, or Adel, Georgia, we have nonprofits that we work with throughout the state that they're community builders. These are women running small nonprofits. They don't get the big grants. Nobody knows what they're doing except people in their community. We support them, help them connect with each other, and help them build their infrastructure, support them in the work that they're doing so that they can get more access to publicity and funds. Fifth initiative is called the Compassion Index, and it's like,
how do you engage it?
In a way, it's about 26 questions that ask you, how are you creating welcoming and belonging in your place of business, in your faith spaces, in your organization? And so one of the examples that we give is ADA accessibility. So places have to have a ramp. But have you ever been to a restaurant where the ramp is in the back and it's by the garbage can and it's all greasy? Nobody wants to come into a restaurant space that way. So what would it take to clean up that space? To put a little fence by the trash can, to put a little flower box there, and to pressure wash it so it's not so gross. But then it says welcome.
And as you're speaking about all the different programs, which are incredible and wonderful, and looking forward to Compassion Con, having a presence there, what do we do about teaching our children how, to share their fruit like the monkeys? Even though you say it's innate, but I still think that there's got to be so much that we can do. When kids are small, especially when their minds are open, and maybe they're thinking about that, but I don't know what happens somewhere. I don't know if it's puberty or whatever.
Well, I think, the Charter for Compassion says, teach your children about other traditions, religions, and cultures. So, to me, it also comes down to, where do we invest our money? And as a society, where are we putting our money? And to put it into our children and into learning about peace and compassion. If you don't know that peace and compassion exists, and you really only know that the way to solve a problem is through violence, because you see that on TV, or because nobody's ever presented anything to you, restorative justice, that's not widely out there. So how do we bring those things in? How do we put funding behind it, which includes for the children? So teaching them about other traditions, religions, and cultures, I think that is one of the big pieces. How to share. We did years ago something called a compassion bench, which is similar to the buddy bench. So I don't know if you know the buddy bench, but that's a bench that's on the playground. So if someone doesn't have someone to play with, they sit on the buddy bench, and kids are taught, if someone's sitting on the buddy bench, come on over and be their buddy. It's those kinds of things. And I think the other thing that's really important, because we don't have a lot of children's programming, but Emory has C-Learning, social emotional learning programs. Social emotional learning is now in the school system. So how do we support those kinds of things? But the other piece is, where do kids learn from, right? Besides the internet, so we got to figure that one out.
Video games.
But they learn from what they see from the adults around them. So if the adults around them are being compassionate, then you are leading your young people to see that and then emulate that. So I really think that, yes, investing in the children, absolutely. There's a lot that we could do through the school system, but there's also a lot that we can do as individuals, as an aunt, as a mentor, where we can embody compassion, and kids will see that. you know, when you get angry in the car, the driver behind you, not that I've ever done that myself.
You start dropping the F-bomb or, whatever.
And there's a kid in the car, right? Where I've started to practice that if someone honks, I just say, I hope you get there on time, because that way I don't get as angry, and I figure, well, maybe they're in a rush, and so I have a little bit more empathy for them. But your kids, the kids around you see those kinds of things.
That makes me, it reminds me to ask about self-compassion. We talked a little bit about that, but how do we learn, how do we cultivate self-compassion? Sometimes the most difficult, and you talked about the getting a bad grade on a test and how to reorder your thinking on that.
Self-compassion, I think, is especially for me. I am from another part of the planet, and I had the glorious privilege of growing up in a collective society. I'm from Nigeria, and you know, there's this spectrum from collectivism all the way to individualism. And I wanted to come to America to be this individualistic person and not have to listen to the beat of the drum of the collective. I actually think that there are things we need to be collective in, and there are things we need to be individualistic in. And I think it's something that is fluid and toggles, because we need each other, but we need to be our own selves as well. And I think in this culture, in Western American culture, we're so caught up in individualism that difference becomes a threat. Conflict becomes you versus me, as opposed to, wow, within this diverse collective, we have solutions that we could never come up with on our own. So the first thing we have to do is to be compassionate about the difference within ourselves. So like Leanne talked about, you know, she's never yelled at someone driving in the car, like I've never yelled at them. But even when you do yell at them, right, the normal thing is, oh my God, I'm such a bad person. Why did I do that? I know better. You know, I was meditating this morning and I said I wasn't. That's you not having self-compassion. Self-compassion is, oh my God, I just love the fact that I'm so human. And you laugh at yourself and you say to your friend, how do I stop yelling at folk in traffic? I don't want to be that person. And guess what? I am that person and I'm not happy with myself. Okay, fine, whatever. Like, loosen up. You don't have to be perfect. You don't have to be superior to anybody else. You don't there's no reward in being superior. My A++ grade doesn't make me a superior person to your A+++. I wasn't going to say B. You know, it doesn't make you or me. That's the thing. We're looking for this superiority that stems out of that individualism. We have in South Africa, in the Southern African part of the country, a word that the concept flows throughout all of Africa, which is Ubuntu. I am because you are. It is when I look in your eyes and I see my humanity reflected back to me in your eyes, that my full humanity is recognized. And so for you, right? So when Leanne says, you won't believe what I did in traffic, and I don't, that you don't get to talk about my friend like that, right? We have to make self-compassion part of the culture and the ethics of how we deal with people. When I think of ethics, I think first thing that popped in my head was a town that created a law that said no urban camping, which is a way of saying homeless people stay away, right? How is that compassion, right? NIMBY, not in my neighborhood, yeah, I kind of understand. Like, I don't want a tent on my front lawn, but how are we taking care of folks to make sure that somebody doesn't have to live in a tent, right? These are all things, like when I put myself in the shoes of being sick, being close to bankruptcy, possibly being homeless, then I can begin to make decisions that impact my whole community with compassion. So it starts with me. So me thinking, dang, what is it like to be homeless? Can you imagine living in a tent and then being told you can't live in this tent, in this space? That's self-compassion. When you begin to envision the possibilities of what can happen to you as a frail, normal human being, then you can now begin to infuse your ethic, the ethics of how you do your work with those sentiments. Did that answer that?
You answered beautifully. And I have to say, on that happy note, we are going to have to wrap. It's been wonderful to speak with you, both co-directors of Compassionate Atlanta, Leanne Rubenstein, and Iyabo Onipede. Thank you very much for being with us at the table.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you for being at the table. I hope you'll be more compassionate toward yourself and others as a result of sharing this time with us. Take care. See you next time.